the creak of the hinge, the scrape of metal against cobblestone, and then the sound that doesn't belong in any human throat, a choked, muffled whimper, flattened into silence by the weight of a spiked iron plate pressing down on a tongue. You're being dragged through the center of town, your own street, past the baker's stall where you bought bread just yesterday, past the church steps where you were baptized. The cage around your head is fitted with horns, literal devil horns, so that every person who sees you understands what you've become. Not a neighbor. It's not a woman. A lesson. This isn't fantasy. This is England, sometime in the early 1600s, and the crime, speaking too loudly, arguing with a husband, being called difficult by someone who mattered more than you did. Before we walk further into this nightmare, I have to tell you, I'm still amazed that a story like this, buried in the dust of parish records and courtroom logs, reaches people in every corner of the world. If you're watching from somewhere far from where this happened, drop a comment and let me know. It's wild to think history this dark still pulls us all in. Now, let's step back and see how we got here. In early modern Europe, specifically England, Scotland, and parts of the continent between the 1500s and 1700s, society had a problem. It wasn't war, it wasn't famine, it was women who refused to behave. Women who spoke back. Women who gossiped, who argued in the marketplace, who challenged their husbands in front of witnesses. The legal term was scold, but the definition was so vague it could mean anything. Too loud, too opinionated, too visible. The punishment wasn't a fine, it wasn't a warning. It was a device called the scold's bridle, also known as the branks, and it was designed to do one thing: lock the mouth and parade the body. The bridle was an iron cage that enclosed the entire head. Inside, a flat metal plate, sometimes studded with spikes, was forced into the mouth and pressed down hard against the tongue. If you tried to speak, the spikes would pierce the soft tissue. If you tried to scream, you'd choke on your own blood. And then, with a leash attached to the cage, a town official would walk you through the streets, ensuring that everyone saw what happened to women who forgot their place. But here's the thing that gnaws at you when you read the court records. The bridle wasn't just functional, it was decorative. Some were adorned with bells, others had grotesque animal features, long snouts, donkey ears, exaggerated tongues hanging out in mockery. The cruelty wasn't just physical, it was theatrical. The town needed to see you transformed, not just punished, from woman to animal, from neighbor to warning. One case from 1655 in Chester, England, records a woman named Anne Runnikers who was bridled for brawling and disturbing the peace. The peace she disturbed. An argument with a tradesman who shortchanged her. But the law didn't care about context, it cared about correction. Anne was walked through the market square on a Saturday market day when the crowd was thickest, and the records note that she was led about for the space of 1 hour. Imagine that hour, every face you know, every person who bought from you, borrowed from you, prayed beside you, all of them watching. The question that haunts you isn't why did they do this? It's simpler and more disturbing. Why did the crowd stay? Because here's the psychology beneath the metal. Public punishment doesn't work unless the public participates. The bridle needed the crowd. The shame required witnesses. And the witnesses didn't just watch, they learned. They learned that dissent has a shape, that defiance has a sound, and that both can be locked away. But the bridle wasn't the only water-ender in marriage of control. There was another device, older and cruder, that didn't bother with cages. It just used the river. The ducking stool, sometimes called the cucking stool, was a wooden chair mounted on a long beam or lever, positioned at the edge of a river or village pond. A woman accused of being a scold, a gossip, or simply troublesome was strapped into the chair and then dunked repeatedly into the water, sometimes just once or twice for humiliation, sometimes dozens of times, until she was too exhausted or hypothermic to resist. The crowd would gather on the banks. Children would point, men would jeer, and the woman, gasping and shivering, would be plunged again and again, the water closing over her head like a fist. This wasn't just punishment, it was ritual. The logic borrowed from older superstitions about trial by water, the idea that water, being pure, would reject the guilty and accept the innocent. But the ducking stool inverted that logic into something crueler. If you floated, you were a witch. If you sank, you were innocent, but you might drown anyway. Either way, the water wasn't testing truth. It was enforcing submission. One account from 1681 in Kingston upon Thames describes a woman named Sarah Leach, ducked for scolding and causing strife among neighbors. The record notes she was plunged 3 times and brought up near to fainting. When she was unstrapped, wet and trembling, the magistrate asked if she had learned her lesson. The record doesn't note her answer. Maybe she couldn't speak, maybe she chose not to. Either way, the lesson was complete. But here's the question that should chill you. Who decided what counted as strife? Who drew the line between a legitimate complaint and a punishable offense? Because when you dig into the cases, you find something disturbing. Many of the women accused of scolding were widows, women who owned property, women who refused marriage offers, women who, for one reason or another, existed outside the protection and control of a man. The machinery of punishment didn't just target crime, it targeted independence. And then there was fire. If the bridle and the ducking stool were about humiliation, burning at the stake was about erasure. It was the nuclear option, reserved for the woman who wasn't just difficult, she was dangerous, the heretic, the witch, the woman whose very existence challenged not just a husband or a neighbor, but the cosmic order itself. Burning wasn't efficient, it wasn't quick, but it was visible. A column of smoke could be seen for miles. The smell would linger in the town for days, and the crowd, always the crowd, would gather, not just to witness, but to participate. Bringing kindling was an act of communal righteousness. Watching the flames was a form of prayer. The most famous victim, of course, is Joan of Arc, burned in 1431 in Rouen, France. A 19-year-old peasant girl who claimed to hear the voice of God, who led an army, who refused to wear a dress even when her life depended on it. The charges against her were numerous: heresy, cross-dressing, witchcraft. But the real crime was simpler. She was a woman who refused to be silent, to be small, to be what they needed her to be. The records of her trial are meticulous. Her answers were sharp, clever, theologically sound. She out-argued bishops. She held her ground against trained inquisitors. And so they decided that her voice was the problem. The fire would take care of that. As the flames rose, Joan asked the executioner to hold a cross high so she could see it. Her last word, repeated over and over until the smoke choked it off, was Jesus. The crowd, some of them, wept. Others cheered. And when it was over, when the ashes were swept into the Seine, the authorities made sure to announce that nothing remained. No bone, no relic, no evidence that she had ever existed. But here's the paradox. They couldn't burn away if Joan was truly guilty. Why did the church rehabilitate her 25 years later? Why did they admit, in writing, that the trial was unjust? Why did they turn the witch into a saint? Because power doesn't burn truth, it only burns the person holding it. Now, let's talk about the devices you've probably seen in museums. The breast ripper, the pear of anguish, the iron chair covered in spikes, the Spanish donkey. These names sound like props from a horror film, and that's partly the point. Many of these devices are controversial among historians. Some were exaggerated, some were misattributed, and some were likely never used at all. But whether they were common or rare, real or embellished, their existence tells us something crucial. The culture that imagined these tools was already thinking in terms of gendered punishment. Torture that targeted breasts, wombs, and mouths. Torture designed not just to cause pain, but to humiliate and invade the specifically female body. Take the pear of anguish, a metal object shaped like a pear, inserted into the mouth or other orifices, then cranked open from the inside. Was it widely used? Probably not. But the fact that someone designed it, that someone wrote about it, that the idea circulated as a possibility, reveals the underlying philosophy. A woman's body, especially one accused of sexual or verbal transgression, was a space that could be legally violated in the name of correction. The same logic appears in records of the breast ripper, an iron claw used, according to some sources, to mutilate women accused of adultery or witchcraft. Again, historians debate how common this was, but the symbolism is undeniable. The punishment attacked the symbol of femininity itself, the body part associated with nurturing, with motherhood, with life torn apart as a public lesson. And then there's the iron chair, or Judas chair, covered in spikes on the seat, back, and armrests. Some versions could be heated. The accused would be forced to sit for hours, sometimes days, the spikes piercing deeper with every shift of weight. This wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was designed to break the will, to extract confessions, to turn the body into a testimony against itself. Because here's the truth, buried in all these devices, real or imagined, torture doesn't reveal truth, it manufactures it. A person in unbearable pain will say whatever they think will make the pain stop. They'll confess to witchcraft, to adultery, to heresy, to anything. And once the confession is signed, the system calls it justice. So when we ask, were these devices really used? We're asking the wrong question. The better question is, what kind of society needed to believe they were? The answer is a society terrified of women who didn't fit. Women who knew too much, healed too well, spoke too plainly, lived too independently. In a world where social harmony depended on rigid roles, any woman who stepped outside her assigned script was a threat not just to one man, but to the entire system. And so the system invented tools, legal, physical, symbolic, to put her back. But let's not pretend this was universal. Not every judge was a sadist. Not every community was bloodthirsty. There were dissenters, priests who refused to condemn, magistrates who quietly reduced sentences, neighbors who helped accused women escape. History isn't a monolith. It's a battlefield. And slowly, painfully, the battlefield shifted. In 1735, Britain passed the Witchcraft Act, which stopped prosecuting people for being witches and started prosecuting people for pretending to be witches. A subtle but seismic shift. The scolds, bridle, and ducking stool faded through the 18th and 19th centuries, replaced by fines and social reform. The logic changed from pain teaches to what actually fixes a community. But here's what didn't change. The crowd. Every one of these punishments required an audience. The stake, the bridle, the stool, they were performances. And performances die when the audience refuses to watch. So the hardest question isn't about the past. It's about now, when we see someone publicly shamed online, dragged through the digital town square, their worst moment screenshotted and shared until their name becomes a punchline. Are we really so different? When we watch someone get ratioed or canceled, when we participate in the pylon, or even just scroll past without objecting, are we the crowd that stayed silent? Or are we the ones holding the lever? Joan of Arc's last word was Jesus. Anne Runekers walked the streets of Chester in an iron cage. Sarah Leach was pulled from the river, gasping, and thousands of women whose names were never recorded, whose cases were lost, whose voices were locked or drowned or burned. They're still asking the same question. When the mouth is locked, does the rumor die? Or does the act of locking it make the rumor swell? History doesn't give us easy answers, but it gives us mirrors. And sometimes, when you look closely enough, you see yourself in the crowd.